Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. I'm not looking for a fight with Gary Stevenson, and Gary, if you're watching this, know that everything I'm about to say is said with love, and that's what makes this one of the most important videos that I'm going to make. Because on the left, we need to be able to disagree with each other passionately while still recognizing that we share the same goal. And that is critical because the future we're trying to build is one where power in the UK is shared by multiple different progressive parties. So being able to disagree with people while working with them is essential to this country's future. That said, a lot of my mutuals, especially my black mutuals, are not happy with Gary Stevenson at all because of what he just said. So let's get into it.
I think there is a risk that the left gets very, very angry and starts to be really, really aggressive and accusatory towards people who might be voting for reform.
Gary, you know that politics matters or you wouldn't be doing this. So this stuff actually affects people's lives. And the Reform Party was originally created as the Brexit Party, and their Brexit policy was a no-deal Brexit, which I have them on camera saying would damage the UK's food supply for the next 20 years. The British Medical Association has said that a no-deal Brexit would cause catastrophic damage to the NHS. The Reform Party was created to achieve that specific goal. So the people that support the Reform Party are supporting a cause that is a literal threat to our survival. So I am sure that you understand that on a human level it is going to be difficult for people to avoid an accusatory tone when dealing with Reform supporters. But Gary uses a couple of Reform supporters as examples of how to bridge that divide.
Wealth tax or no wealth tax?
It's a very hard one. I mean, I come from a working class town. Everything in kind of Reform's policies would maybe leaning more towards no wealth tax.
So for me, if the wealth tax was possible, I'm at a stage in my politics where I would actually support it.
There are a lot of Reform voters who'd be supportive of wealth taxes.
You know the concept of blue labour, right? The idea of economically being on the left, but essentially still being racist. It's class solidarity without necessarily race solidarity. Even though black people, for example, are statistically the most likely to be in poverty. My point is, class solidarity without race solidarity is not class solidarity because it keeps the working class divided against itself, which only helps the upper class. So the fact that some Reform supporters might support a wealth tax shouldn't make people like me feel any warmth towards them. And I know that's not your main point. I know your main point is about us being able to work together, but I just want to remove that justification for your point.
The vast majority of people in this country are not experts in politics. They get their information from the media or from social media, and what they have been told and are being told consistently in the media is that the reason you are poor, the reason your kids can't get a house, the reason you can't get a job is because of immigration or because of illegal immigration, because of refugees. That's what they're being told.
There, Gary's arguing that Reform supporters are simply dealing with a different data set. Their knowledge base is different to ours. Their reality is different to ours, and that's why they come to the conclusions that they've come to. And I understand that. I remember being in Sunderland once and feeling genuine sympathy for somebody who was clearly far right. She was crying in front of me because she believed, truly, that 80% of rapes in the UK were committed by foreigners. She had been convinced by the Daily Mail, by the far right, that simply closing the borders would pretty much eradicate rape. And she was desperately frustrated that the left, the media, weren't listening to the reality she was facing.
If they go to a protest or, they speak online about this and somebody gets in their face and calls them a racist, that's not going to win them over.
And there Gary's right. Because somebody who's been radicalized in the way that a lot of these Reform voters have been radicalized isn't going to respond well or constructively to being called racist. And that's why I always say that there is no point in calling anybody racist unless you can back up exactly how that person is being racist. Because by definition, you are operating from a knowledge base that means you know why that person is racist. They clearly aren't. So if you're going to actually de-radicalize this person, you have to undo the facts that led them to that conclusion. And that's probably not going to happen at a protest with lots of people because, as was said in Men in Black,
the person is smart, people are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it.
But you can speak to people that you know personally, one-on-one, and lead them to the conclusion that their original assessment was in fact racist.
If you want to get progressive change in the next election, you need to win people over. And I think you need to be really careful to resist the temptation to go around shouting at people, calling them racist.
Now here's the cool bit, because it's also about knowledge bases, what each person knows. Gary is an economist. He's studied economics at the London School of Economics, at Oxford University. He knows his shit on economics. Whereas I'm a law graduate, specializing in EU law and human rights. I led some of the campaigns against Brexit, so that's what I know. And Gary has followed me on Twitter since those Brexit campaign days, so he knows that I know my shit. And that's why on this specific issue, even though I know he knows better than me on economics, this is where I'm going to pull rank. Because I've done the work. During the Brexit years, from 2018 to 2019, I was up and down the country speaking to people in their high streets, finding out why they were willing to follow Nigel Farage down the Brexit rabbit hole. Were you originally pro-Brexit?
For different reasons, yeah, but it's, like they say, it's a tough situation.
Would you think that Brexit will make your life harder or better?
In the fruit game, it's slightly not going to be so good with the pound and the euro. With a lot of our fruit, it comes from Spain. We got to charge our customers more.
What do you think life will be better or worse as a result?
I'm hoping it's going to be better, and I think it's going to be better.
Okay. Do you think that people deserve the right to say, all right, we've had a look at what you said, yes, we want that, or no, we don't want that?
Yeah, I do think that once she has all the factories and making the figures and exactly what's going to be on the table, I think she should come back to people and ask them, especially those that voted yes, is this what you want? Is this what you're going to go forward for?
So I wasn't one of the people that was calling anybody who supported Brexit racist. I was having those conversations, explaining that this was going to make them poorer. And some of them believed me, some of them didn't, but now we are where we are right now. And among Reform voters, in terms of whether Brexit, the policy at the heart of the Reform Party, has made them richer or poorer, they believe that Brexit has made them poorer at a ratio of 3 to 1. So giving Reform voters the benefit of the doubt that this is truly about some class struggle, when they know that Nigel Farage has already made them poorer, just doesn't feel rational. Which suggests that the idea that they're supporting the Reform Party to improve their own living standards is just a smokescreen for the other stuff that Nigel Farage is about. And I'm not saying that none of them can be won over, I'm saying that you're framing this as, give them a chance, they might see reason, but they've had the best part of a decade to see reason and they're still following Nigel Farage when they know he's made them poorer.
There are racists in this country, there always have been racists in this country. There's always been 100,000, 200,000 people who vote for the BNP and might be motivated by racism.
That's probably the most problematic part of the entire video, because the gist of the whole video is focus on what unites us, like class struggle, and try to avoid calling people racist, i.e. calling out racism. And there you are basically saying racism exists, it's always existed, it's always going to exist, so basically ignore it. Because if we're not supposed to explain to Reform supporters why what they're doing is racist, ignoring it is the logical conclusion.
Reform are going to win the next election, and you are not going to stop that by turning around and calling people racists.
You're right, and I don't deny that there are definitely some people who seem to believe that simply shouting racist at Reform supporters is somehow going to shift the needle. But A, as I just explained, that's clearly not all of us. And B, what's missing from what you're saying is hey, don't just call them racist, explain how what they're doing is racist. Because Gary, unless you elaborate on that point in the way I just described, it sounds like you're telling people, mainly ethnic minority people, to be quiet about our concerns about the rising tide of racism. Simply to avoid rocking the boat and maintain what I just explained was a false class solidarity.
Those people at those protests, they, just like you, are struggling to pay the rent, their kids are struggling to pay the rent, they're struggling to find economic futures. If you focus on that, you can build something positive, you can win them over. If you focus on what divides you, all you're going to do is make this country more and more divided.
The angle that Reform voters are poor, and therefore we can bring them round to our side, doesn't work because Nigel Farage is deliberately appealing to that poverty. In order to gain mainstream appeal with working class people, the Reform Party is now doing stereotypically left-wing things, like scrapping the two-child cap on welfare support. So seeking common ground on the basis that we're all poor isn't going to make them suddenly abandon the Reform Party.
I think you can afford to find your differences and fight over them when you are winning.
Again, that is definitely top 5 worst things in this video, but I'm going to try and show some understanding here because I've been there. Because during the Brexit years, I disgusted myself by making those sorts of compromises. Because I made a calculation. We'd already voted to leave the EU, so unless it was stopped, we were going to be out of the EU within the next 2 or 3 years. So with a 2-year deadline and limited resources, I had to make a decision. Was it realistic that I could convince 17.4 million Brexit voters to suddenly love immigration? Or should I just point to the fact that EU law literally says you can control immigration as an EU member, so we didn't need to leave the EU? And so I had to win people over by having conversations with people who I knew hated immigration, but I had to just let that slide and instead point to the law which showed it could be controlled. But the difference is, with this, racism is the thing we're trying to stop, so ignoring it until we've stopped it doesn't really make sense. Plus, we're trying to build a movement based on equality for all, and that includes being anti-racist. Like, back then I was trying to stop economic damage that came with a side of racism. Right now we're trying to stop racism that comes with a side of economic damage.
Farage and Reform, it's not the current far right. I know these guys get called fascists and they get called racists. I don't think they are all fascists and racists.
Again, giving grace. I'm assuming that there, Gary means that a lot of the people that push this far-right bullshit don't actually believe it. It's just a grift for them.
At the moment, Farage has the phenomenal strength of never having been in power, which means that he cannot be blamed for any of the economic weaknesses that the UK is in.
Gary, come on. Come on, Gary, please. Nigel Farage deliberately stood down 319 candidates of the Reform Party in 2019, specifically in order to help Boris Johnson deliver his version of Brexit. So not only was it pressure from Nigel Farage's UKIP party in 2014-15 that led David Cameron to call the referendum in the first place that led to Brexit, but he also helped shape it. So yes, it might be Nigel Farage's narrative that he has never been in power, therefore he's not responsible for the mess that we're in, but he is directly implicated in the most economically damaging policy the UK has ever concocted. So if the objective of this video is that we need to reach out to reform supporters and say, hey, we're all poor, Brexit is the one thing that we can point to say, hey, Nigel Farage made you poorer. Because the problem with this video you've put out is that while your objective is to prevent a Nigel Farage government, you're taking away the two main things that we can use with reform supporters to say, hey, Nigel Farage is a bad guy. Those two things being Brexit and his far-right bigotry. But then we get on to his direct message to reform supporters.
I know that there's not a lot of great political leaders out there.
Again, this is my issue with reform supporters because yes, Keir Starmer, shit. The Tories, shit. Farage, shit. Zach Plansky and the Greens are right there. There are other options they could choose. They're choosing to go with the far right. But here's the bit that most of you are angry with Gary on.
And I grew up in a very multicultural place with lots of people, lots of different colours, lots of different countries. And last weekend, I had friends who were scared to leave the house. That's because they think you're racists. And I tell those people that you're not all racists.
Now look, Gary's friends are Gary's friends. We don't know their dynamic. And yes, on paper it's bad to invalidate the fears of ethnic minority people about a clearly racist party. But I think the core problem here is Gary's understanding of what the word racist actually means. Because for a white person to be racist against ethnic minorities, it does not mean that they actively hate those people. I am 100% certain that there were millions of white people during slavery who didn't actively hate black people, they simply didn't care that their objectives would lead to the suffering of black people. So the sort of white person who is able to overlook the fact that Nigel Farage was recently on stage hugging somebody because she called for asylum seekers to be burned alive and then pled guilty to inciting racial hatred, that might not necessarily be because those reform supporters hate brown people, but whether they do or not, they clearly don't care about ethnic minorities because they're voting for somebody who said that 46% of British Muslims support terrorism when that was a lie. They're voting for a party created by somebody who said that black people were inherently violent because of excess testosterone. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that they hate ethnic minorities, but they are willing to vote for a party that they know will hurt ethnic minorities for their own political reasons. Because again, and I'm going to pull rank here, this time as a black person, for us, we don't care what's in your heart, it is your actions that matter. Whether you actively hate us as ethnic minorities, or you simply don't care whether we're hunted in the street, we're still going to call that racist. But it is at this point that Gary, to his credit, does make some demands of reform supporters when it comes to racism.
And they don't believe me. So I need you to prove me right. If it's about immigration, and it's not about racism, keep saying that.
But they've been saying that. They've always been saying that. Nigel Farage has been saying that since 2016 when he stood in front of a picture of visibly Middle Eastern people to scare people about European migration. Like he used people who had nothing to do with our EU membership because the UK wasn't part of the EU's common asylum policy. So Nigel Farage is the perfect example of people saying that it's about immigration, but really it's about race.
And if you see racists in your movement, you need to do something about that.
The leader of their party was just on stage hugging somebody specifically because they pled guilty to inciting racial hatred. So they have already seen racism in their movement, and they're still in that movement. And this is where I have to pull rank again, because I was at the sharp end of the Brexit campaign, the People's Vote campaign. I went around the country specifically listening to Brexit voters. We have heard these people out. They had their chance to make this country better, and it has made this country significantly worse, and they agree with that. We on the left have been told for 10 years that we're the ones who need to bend and listen to them. we're done now. It is our turn to start building the kind of country that we want to live in. And that kind of country is the kind of country that you, Gary, are at the forefront of building. Because the rampant financial inequality in the UK is the core of the problem. And class solidarity is vital to achieving that, which is precisely why we have to take a zero tolerance approach to the people that are trying to pit working class people against each other through bigotry, racism and xenophobia. Because again, Gary Stevenson, on issues of economics and financial inequality, I bow to you. But on issues of how to deal with Brexit, Farage and racism, please listen to me. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics, so Politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.